The old bases loaded king is dead. Long live the new bases loaded king. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is cold, the Twins talk is hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about this Twins series opening win over the Chicago White Sox. Well, on the heels of a 5-game losing streak, the Minnesota Twins turn to their ace as they begin a homestand against the White Sox. Inauspicious start for Joe Ryan as the Southsiders get runners on second and third with nobody out, but Ryan buckles down and escapes unfazed. Trevor Larnach shows his appreciation to his starting pitcher with a 2-out RBI single in the next half inning, and Minnesota goes up 1-0. Into the third, the White Sox tie the game with Andrew Benintendi's 2-out single, but Minnesota responds by loading the bases in the fourth. That would be the death knell of the 2025 Minnesota Twins, but it's when the 2026 Twins are at their best. Tristan Gray hits his second grand slam of the season to put the Twins up by 4. However, a rocky fifth for Ryan allows Chicago to keep pace with a pair of homers in the 3-run frame, but that's no problem at all for the Twins offense, who once again load the bases and deliver back-to-back RBI singles by Austin Martin and Victor Caratini. Then Luke Keeschall drives in another bases-loaded run with a sacrifice fly. When the dust clears, it's a second straight 4-run frame, with Tristan Gray also knocking in his 5th run of the game. Uneventful from there until the 9th, when Miguel Vargas makes the score look a little closer with a home run off Travis Adams. That was his second of the game. The Twins hold on for the 9-6 victory. Joe Ryan earns his 4th win despite allowing 4 runs on 8 hits. He struck out 9, gave up 0 walks and 6 innings of work. Minnesota improves to 28-33. The Twins are in 3rd place in the AL Central, 6 games out of 1st and 1.5 games behind Texas and Toronto for the final wildcard spot in the American League. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Let's get into this game. And for baseball, one of the things I love about this sport is just how quickly your emotions can turn. Just how quickly you can be convinced that things are now all of a sudden going in a separate direction than what they were previously coming into that point. And just think of where we were coming into this game. Yesterday, the panic mode button was on. A weekend sweep against the Pittsburgh Pirates that included a devastating walk-off loss in one of those games. Then you also are on a 5-game losing streak because you lost the last 2 to the White Sox, who are suddenly good again after years of just awfulness. So you have that 5-game losing streak. You have an injured pitcher, 2 injured pitchers actually, with Kendry Rojas and Bailey Ober. You have a DFA'd ineffective pitcher in Simeon Woods-Richardson. All of those guys in the starting rotation. So not only are you on a 5-game losing streak, but you are on thin ice with your pitching staff. Despite having a lot of depth coming into the season, you're starting to now envision a future where Mike Paredes is your number 5 starter, a guy that was not even on the 40-man roster a couple of weeks ago. So woe is me, was the feeling yesterday. And yet today, after a win like that, a 9-6 win against a White Sox team that may be good, everything seems all right. Everything seems just fine. The troubles of yesterday seem to have evaporated for this Minnesota Twins team, at least for me. And that seems to be the constant, especially in the first 4 months of the baseball season, where things can be at rock bottom for over a week and look like they're only going to get worse. And then all of a sudden, just one thing happens and it makes you smile again. And that is baseball. And that is what this Minnesota Twins game did for me, at least. It didn't start out that way, though. It very much could have gone in a different direction. There is a reality, there is a simulation out there somewhere in the billions and trillions and infinite abyss of different timelines that the quantum physics would tell us are out there. There are plenty of timelines where Joe Ryan's rough first two batters, not necessarily to his own fault, give Chicago a big top of the first inning, and we're talking about a 6th straight loss for your Minnesota Twins. That did not happen. Let's paint the picture in that top of the first and use that to come to the conclusion that Joe Ryan deserves the ace status, not only of this Twin staff, but as a legitimate number one pitcher in Major League Baseball. First hitter gets on with, I don't know if it was officially ruled an error by Tristan Gray, but it was a play that he could have and should have made. But he bobbles the ball on the transfer, he kicked it up, and there's a runner at first. The next hitter gets a double to the wall with Cody Clemens playing in center field. Probably could have made the catch, or you would expect if Byron Buxton was back there and fully healthy and playing in the field and not just hitting as a designated hitter, you would expect Byron Buxton to come down with that. But since it's Cody Clemens and not like James Outman and not Austin Martin, doesn't have quite the range, doesn't have quite the hops. And instead of him making a great, and it would have been a big effort catch for whoever was out there, but it's something that we've come to expect from especially Byron Buxton, Clemens unable to come up with it. So all of a sudden, you get the short end of the stick as Joe Ryan. And you've got runners on second and third with nobody out against a White Sox team that just won 3 of 4 against you last week. Things very easily could have taken a turn from that point on. But Joe Ryan buckled down and grinded through that inning, got a pop-up, got a strikeout, and was able to give the Twins a scoreless game heading into their first at-bats of the game. Very easily, especially with guys like Colson Montgomery, and I know Munetaka Murakami is now injured and on the injured list for the White Sox, so he wasn't going to be a threat, and he kind of lived in our nightmares last week with all of the home runs that he was hitting all across the ballpark. He wasn't going to be an issue, but it's still a White Sox lineup that has been surprisingly potent this season, and Joe Ryan was able to keep them at bay despite being in a prime position to score runs. And that is why I think that Ryan can consider himself a legitimate number one pitcher. And if teams are going to be seeing if the Twins are going to be selling at the deadline, and if the Twins do indeed sell at the trade deadline at the end of July, he should command some sort of ransom, as much of a ransom as you can get for a half year or 1.5 year player who has that team control left in Joe Ryan. He didn't have his best stuff today. We said the line, and the line was probably about as, I don't want to say ugly, but unimpressive as Ryan was as a pitcher today, but still was able to grind through innings, and when it came down to it, was able to buckle down and not allow the White Sox to ever have a lead in this game. Some incredible stuff from Joe Ryan. His whiff rate low for him, 25%. Relied a lot on the fastball. He gave up more hard contact than soft contact. 10 of the balls in play against him were hit hard, and 8 of them were not. And that is, I think, something that you are going to live with Joe Ryan, who is a pitcher that likes to throw a four-seam fastball up in the zone so that he can come at you with a couple of different breaking pitches or a couple of different movement fastballs like the cutter and splitter down in the zone later on in the at-bat. You're going to have to live with that because that is what allows Joe Ryan to be a complete pitcher and not just the number 2 or number 3 guy that he was 2021 through, 2023. And to be the ace that he's been probably since 2024 on. So despite not having his best stuff, because there are going to be days where even the best pitchers in Major League Baseball, the best pitchers in the history of Major League Baseball have not had their best stuff, have had what could be blow-up starts, and maybe don't have their command. Joe Ryan was not lacking in his command, no walks and 9 strikeouts, so that was one encouraging sign, but able to get the job done anyway in those instances. That is what separates the elite pitchers from the pitchers that are just good. Pitchers that you feel comfortable with, but probably don't feel comfortable with on a long-term contract. And for me, this game kind of showed me that Joe Ryan can fall into that former category of, if not elite, at least that second tier of pitcher, which is still the number one guy in Major League Baseball. If not at that Jacob Mizorowski, Paul Skeens, Tariq Skubal, Cam Schlittler level, just a rung below that with everything that he's been able to do, despite, obviously, tonight probably having the worst pure stuff rating of his career. So hats off to Joe Ryan, who came through and was the stopper that the Twins needed to end this 5-game losing streak, to get them back on the right track, and to give us sort of that more optimistic, or give me that optimistic feeling that I mentioned at the beginning of this game, that everything is going to be just fine. Because it is, or it could be. It's not the end of the world yet. Usually when it's the end of the world, it's after a trade sell-off and it's August and September and things are just going completely down the drain. It's not the end of the world yet. The Twins are still only a game and a half out of a playoff spot, despite a 5-game losing streak, despite losing 3/5 of their starting rotation. Despite all of that, they are still in a position to make a run for the playoffs. And a lot of that just has to do with the lack of upper-end talent in the American League Central that the Twins have no control over, but it also has to do with the Twins maybe at least a little bit going above the expectations that we had for them coming into the season, whereas I think a lot of us thought of them to likely be where the Tigers and Royals currently are at in the AL Central standings, which is right now about 6 or 7 games behind Minnesota even. They've lived up to the expectations. The rest of the American League has lived down to the expectations, and that has given the Twins at least an opportunity still here in June to stay in a position to maybe make the playoffs come July, when you are making those decisions to either bolster your roster or to sell the pieces that are going away anyway and kind of just tank away the last 2 months. The goal right now is to get to that July 31st and not make it an obvious selling situation for Jeremy Zoll and the Pohlad ownership group. If we can get to that point, then I think all bets are off, all chips are off the table. I'm not saying this is a team that has any really actual chance at the World Series, but I am saying they have an actual chance at the playoffs, and we've seen stranger things happen in the playoffs once you get in there. Baseball is one of the sports where truly, when you just get your name into the hat, when you get into the ring, you have a chance. I think baseball and hockey probably at that, whereas the NFL and the NBA, more often than not, you're going to get the top seeds only, and it's kind of just nice to be there if you're one of those lower seeds. But Joe Ryan allowed the Twins to stay on that path with this game by thwarting any chance of Chicago breaking the game open in that top of the first inning. Also, we go from the poor situational hitting in that inning of the Chicago White Sox to a continued theme of success for this Twins offense. It's a Twins offense that is kind of littered outside of Byron Buxton and what Ryan Jeffers has been able to do, and even Austin Martin can put in that, and Trevor Larnach when he's going up against a right-handed pitcher. It's littered with pretty below average hitters. I don't think any of us had thoughts that Tristan Gray was going to be a Twin for 2 months. I don't think we thought that Brooks Lee was going to have much success. Those guys are about average, if not below average, major league hitters. And it's led the Twins to be about an average offense, but what is setting them apart and allowing them to still be in this playoff position, albeit the 5 games below 500, is that their situational hitting, and there's schools of thought which say, situational hitting is always going to regress to what your actual hitting numbers are, and I kind of would like to do a study on that, and I might over on my Substack for the Grey Duck Sports Network. But they would say that you would regress in those situations. But we've seen with this Twins team that hasn't really been true. Whereas 2024 and 2025, they were much better hitters in bases loaded or non-bases loaded situations, or situations when there were not runners in scoring position, rather than the big moments. They were better hitters statistically for whatever reason. Now we are seeing the opposite, where they are one of the best teams with the bases loaded. And one of the numbers that we've been tracking here on the Twinkie Town Tavern has been the number of bases loaded RBI that the 2025 Twins team had, and the number of bases loaded RBI that the 2026 teams has. And in this game alone, with the bases loaded, and obviously Tristan Gray's grand slam helps a lot with that, with 4, but 7 of the Twins' 9 runs tonight came with the bases loaded. And that puts their season total for bases loaded RBIs at 73. We are at June 1st with 73 RBIs. The whole season for 2025, the Minnesota Twins drove in 74 runs with the bases loaded. And we are not even at the halfway point. And we are going to, barring a historic run of woefulness with the bases loaded, we are going to surpass that number before the end of June. Before next week, probably. We are going to be a better bases loaded hitting team, or a more successful bases loaded hitting team than what this Twins team was a year ago. Last year hit 191 with runners with the bases loaded. This year, 329. Top 10 rate stats. They're the number 1 RBI team because they've had a lot of bases loaded opportunities. But when we look at OPS, they're still in the top 10. So not only are they creating these opportunities for themselves, they are also cashing these opportunities in. Tristan Gray, with 4 of those RBIs tonight. We got Luke Keeschel, we got Austin Martin, and I believe Trevor Larnach was the other one. Victor Carantini. Trevor Larnach had the 2-out single. Again, another situational hitting thing. But he had that 2-out single that allowed Minnesota to get on the board first in the first inning. So if we can see those sort of steps at the situational hitting level, and I'm not going to pretend to be some hitting guru that can tell you that the Twins have done so-and-so to change their approach in this situations from last year. I just think they're making better contact, and they're being more selective, and kind of just playing how they have throughout the rest of the season, and putting a priority on taking good at-bats and not giving those at-bats away. And that has allowed them to now get more favorable pitches when they have those bases loaded situations, and to rightfully decipher when and where those more favorable pitches are going to appear in those at-bats. I think you can credit that to Derek Shelton. I think you can credit that to a mostly new Twins hitting team, the third new hitting coach in 3 years. And I think that is one of the reasons why, despite not being really statistically average overall in terms of OPS and all of that, they are about statistically average. And obviously you always want to hope that's not a big thing to hang your hat on as being a league average offensive team. But I think given what we were looking at coming into the season, where it looked like maybe our only offense would come from Byron Buxton in his 4 trips through the batting order, with some help from Ryan Jeffers every once in a while, I think league average for your offense is above where we expected coming into the season. And kind of going off of that, I think it is equally as impressive how the Twins adjusted to David Sandlin. You might remember David Sandlin as the pitcher for the White Sox in one of the games against us last week. I believe it was the first game of the series in Chicago. Sandlin was making his major league debut. debut, Byron Buxton had a solo home run to lead off the game against Sandlin, and then Sandlin settled in and retired the next 18 hitters that he faced. And Minnesota, not having much film, not having much of a scouting report on a guy who has not been at the major league level, wasn't swinging and missing a lot, but was having a lot of soft contact. And even Derek Shelton said, like, we are taking good at-bats against him. We're putting the ball in play. They only struck us out 4 times, but the contact that we had was soft. They get 1 game of film, they get 1 game of experience against him, and they kind of flip the tables on Sandlin by getting 8 of their 9 runs against the White Sox rookie making just his second start. Credit that to the approach, credit that to the Major League scouts who prepare the reports for the hitters as they head into the next series, and credit to the Twins hitters for executing and rebounding from what was a pitiful performance against David Sandlin last week in order to put up a very strong offensive performance against him in this game. So the offense not only coming through in great situations, but also coming through the second time that they have seen some of those guys, and that bodes well, you'd think, hopefully, for when the White Sox send some of their other pitchers up to the mound in the coming days, like Davis Martin in tomorrow's game or today's game, depending on when you're listening to this podcast or watching it on the Great X Sports YouTube. And should give you some confidence that familiarity will help Minnesota when it comes to taking on other pitchers in the Twins division as the season continues. When you see those guys 2 or 3 times, maybe even 4 times throughout the course of a season, hopefully, knock on wood, the Twins can follow the pattern they did here and just get better against those pitchers the more that they see them. So that is the takeaway from, or those are the major takeaways from this 9-6 Twins win over the Chicago White Sox as they return home from their 10-game road trip and have a couple of in-division games against a good White Sox team, a disappointing Royals team, and it was a good start. And hopefully this Twins team that has been so high and low and never really finding a middle point can start to get on that hot streak once again, and hopefully this is what kickstarts it and isn't just a lone win scattered in to a much longer losing streak. So we'll go off the diamond for a moment before we end the show and preview tomorrow's game, because we did get some good news on Bailey Ober, who is not dealing with any damage to his UCL. The Twins had their MRI. Remember, this injury for Ober was originally stated as being elbow inflammation, which a lot of times eventually progresses into being a full-on UCL tear. It sometimes is just a placeholder for a UCL tear, but while the team waits to get a complete MRI, complete X-ray, everything. X-rays are for the bones, so they don't see the ligaments, but a complete MRI. Ober does not have any damage to the UCL. It is a flexor strain. They're going to shut him down for 10 to 14 days before letting him get back into the swing of things. So it seems as though if everything goes according to plan, and how rare that happens, perhaps we shouldn't get our hopes too high in the air. But if things go according to plan, he gets those 10 to 14 days of being shut down. He gets, about a couple of days or maybe a week to build himself back up into game shape, gets a couple of starts in the minor leagues, and then comes back up. So that might put us at a month out of Bailey Ober and puts us still maybe at 6 starts from starting pitcher number 5, who we still don't know. Again, yesterday I made the guess that it would be Mike Paredes, but it could be Andrew Morris. It could be someone else that they bring in. But it seems as though, again, knock on wood, Bailey Ober shouldn't miss more than a month and could be back even quicker than that. So he'd be back before the All-Star break, and he would give the Twins the floor in their rotation. He's the number 5 pitcher in the rotation now that Simeon Woods Richardson is out. And he's been better than what you'd want from your typical starting pitcher number 5 in your rotation. So once he gets back, he elevates what the floor of this team does. Maybe Mike Paredes goes on an incredible run, and Bailey Ober has to find someone else's spot to take. If that happens, then that is just good news for you and I watching the games, but I think more likely it is not going to happen, and Bailey Ober will be joining the team in a month again, and hopefully they are not too far out of a playoff position and are kind of in the same position, if not better, that they are currently. A guy that's going to try and help them stay in the same position or get better over that next month is a new man in the Twins bullpen, and that is Justin Lawrence. Justin Lawrence, who originally from the Colorado Rockies, spent the 2025 season and the first part of the 2026 season with the Pittsburgh Pirates, is coming over to the Minnesota Twins in a trade. I believe he was on waivers, so the Twins are just sending cash considerations over to the Pittsburgh Pirates to complete the deal. They're not really giving up any material asset, so you'll take that every day of the week. We talked about it yesterday on the show, that this Twins bullpen, the Twins front office needs to find ways on the margins to improve the bullpen and to continue to shuffle in and shuffle out guys. And once you find the shuffled in guys that are successful, keep them there. And as you see that maybe some of them that you're picking up are not successful, quickly getting them out until you have kind of this piecemeal bullpen. And Justin Lawrence is a direct response to my call to action yesterday. Probably more of a coincidence from my call to action yesterday, but we're going to say that this was a response to Twinkie Town Tavern's call to action in continuing to be active on the bullpen market, despite not doing that much to try and fix the bullpen during a kind of quiet offseason. Justin Lawrence numbers are not great. Even his peripheral numbers, I believe, show that he's not having a great season. The strikeout rate is good. The walk rate is way too high. The home run rate is way too high. And that leads to an exceptionally high FIP that would suggest that his ERA above 5 is likely not just some bad luck, some bad contact luck, bad fielding luck, bad ballpark luck, whatever it may be. It probably is repeatable. It probably is his true baseline. However, when you look even deeper into that, you see some of the stuff numbers. There is some reason to hope, and there is also, going back, he's had successful seasons. And Justin Lawrence is one of I have 2 out-of-the-park baseball guys that have been my pet relievers over the course of my time that I just can't quit on, that I've picked up for one reason or another in my simulations. And if you know out-of-the-park baseball, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know out-of-the-park baseball and you're listening to this podcast, go and get the latest out-of-the-park baseball game and build the Minnesota Twins however you want. You can play as any Minnesota Twins team with full rosters, with full minor league rosters, all of that from 1961 to 2026 and beyond. And you are not doing any gameplay, but you're doing the general manager simulation. Anyway, that aside, Justin Lawrence and Clay Holmes, 2021 version of Clay Holmes, by the way, not the Clay Holmes that became an all-star. Both of those guys were guys that I picked up off of the waivers for my twin simulations in out-of-the-park baseball that both had great success for me. So if we use that as a predictive measure, we saw in 2021 when I picked up Clay Holmes, he ended up being really good in really good in real life, I should say. Hopefully that happens with Justin Lawrence as well. But no, the real reason I think we should have at least some confidence is he has a really good fastball that tests pretty well off the charts on MLB Pitch Profiler or Sarris's Fangraphs Stuff Plus rating, whichever you prefer. And then his sweeper is exceptional. It's just being able to command and control those pitches has been inconsistent and kind of inconsistent on a year-to-year basis, not just an appearance basis. And when it's been good, he's been a really good reliever. And when he hasn't had that consistency and control and command. He has been knocked around the ballpark, has given up a lot of walks, has put a lot of runners on base, is always dealing through traffic, and when you do that, you're going to not be a very effective reliever. So we are hoping that a new change of scenery can kind of give him the better side of that inconsistency and have him be a decent command guy, decent control guy. Pete Mackey has had success and thrived with guys that have had trouble commanding their pitches. So maybe we can expect that from Justin Lawrence. I'm not going to say he's going to be an all-star closer the rest of the way, but I like the strategy of continuing to shuffle in and shuffle out relievers until you find a bullpen that can be successful and that can set this Minnesota Twins team apart from some of the teams that it is similar to, like we mentioned in the last show, like the Pittsburgh Pirates. Their bullpen and their base running, which was at a higher level than ours, was able to set them apart and has set them apart as a better team so far this season. The Twins now making strides to match that by bringing in one of those Pittsburgh Pirates relievers. All right, the Twins go for the series win against the Chicago White Sox tonight, probably when you're listening to this episode of the Twinkie Town Tavern. Connor Prelip will try to shake off a couple of rough starts by taking the mound for Minnesota. He's 1-3 with a 5.13 ERA. Davis Martin, meanwhile, goes for the White Sox. He's having an all-star season. You might not have heard of him, but you might have to get used to his name for the next couple of years in this AL Central because he is 8-1 with a 2.00 ERA, and a predictive stat like FIP would say that is a solid indicator of where his actual stuff is. His FIP is not much higher at 2.31, so this is a good starting pitcher for the Chicago White Sox. Twins are going to have a hard time against him. They had a hard time against him last week, but hopefully the Twins can go ahead and pick up that series win. First pitch for that game is going to be at 6:40 p.m. tonight. All right, that is the last call on Twins Talk for this evening. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here next time. Go Twins.